CFO. So looking at some general budget concerns, each year when you and your team work on the proposed budget, part of your team's analysis is looking at what programs are working and what should be changed. Is that right?
Yes, that happens all year.
And in addition to that analysis, the budget ultimately has to be balanced and sustainable over time.
Correct.
So that means that your team may propose to cut programs or change taxes, but the ultimate goal is always to balance the budget and give residents a fair shot at success in the district. From my review of the budget so far, your proposal this year both cuts programs and makes changes to taxes for some of the same people. So let me give an example. Some program cuts are the programs like Access to Justice, which gives people with low and moderate incomes access to attorneys for civil court cases. So those folks are losing access to this important support, and one of the proposed tax changes would increase the sales tax on everyone in the district, including those same people who would lose supports like Access to Justice. So I see that as people with low incomes being hit twice in this budget. How do you see it?
I don't know if I follow your logic, but what I would say is government services predominantly do fall, the types of government services that you have jurisdiction over in particular fall on more vulnerable people. So if you're asking me that question, does this budget affect cuts? It causes cuts across all of our agencies. And if you are receive services from a lot of different agencies, you may feel that. But at the same time, it makes investments in those same populations that are very significant. A $300 million increase in schools, for example, is going to affect the same families who may have access to justice case. Our increases at DHS to help truant families are going to impact the same families that are going to access to justice. The people that Councilmember Bonds asked about workforce training programs, hopefully they get in one and are successful, and they're not going to ERAP. So I don't know, I don't exactly follow how you link that to sales tax, but I would say that people who get a lot of government services may see one thing adjusted down, but they may have another program that is being improved.
I take your point, except that I haven't heard from any schools yet that see an increase in resources. DHS continues to be stretched way too thin, so I think the vulnerable populations are going to continue to feel this much more acutely than others. And
they feel, vulnerable populations feel everything more acutely than others, Councilmember.
Especially when we cut the programs that they rely on.
Especially when we have fewer revenues and fewer resources than we have. Now, we can sit here and pretend like there's manna from heaven, but there isn't.
And no one's pretending that,
Excuse me, I am responding to you. And what we have had, as I mentioned, is a confluence of activities, and we have to recognize that. Now, if you don't like what I presented, change it.
Okay, respectfully, I'm asking questions to understand the logic so I know what to change.
Here's the logic. We have less money. We have had
We don't have less money.
We have had we've had more than 15 years of 6% growth. We're going to have 2% growth estimated by the CFO moving out to 2028. We will have less money to do the same things. We cannot grow programs by 10% when you have 2% growth. Can't do it. Unsustainable. You wouldn't do it in your household. You can't do it here. So we have to right size our programs. And we can say we're not going to make any investment in growth and attracting business or attracting new residents. We can make our taxes outsized for the whole region. We can do all of that, but you will regret it.
Okay. To be clear, that's not what anyone's suggesting. I'm trying to understand the logic, and I'm trying to make a point that there are people that are losing programs and seeing a tax increase, and there are people in this city who are going to see a tax increase and not lose programs. And I'm trying to understand how we might be able to navigate this different. And so let's look at a different example, like ERAP.
Yep.
So you suggested in the last round of questions that there is abuse of ERAP. I look forward to recommendations for reforming that, but you are proposing to cut ERAP in half. Is that because you believe that half of ERAP applicants are using the program fraudulently?
I believe that there are people who are using ERAP that can pay their rent. I do.
Okay. And for folks who don't know ERAP, a couple facts about ERAP is, one, you can only apply once in a 12-year period. You have to be a particularly low income in order to access it. And you have to be facing eviction.
Mm-hmm. Well, you will face eviction if you don't pay your rent. And if you think the government is going to pay it, you stop paying.
I'm not sure who you're talking to that's facing that, but I'm seeing a lot of people who can't afford to pay their rent who are not trying to game the system.
Okay,
and if
they
there are
can't,
reforms,
but Robert, what I'm suggesting is ERAP is not the program to address that. We have to put our families on the pathway to being able to have jobs that pay their rent, or they have to qualify for one of our voucher programs. But you can't turn a program that's meant for emergency assistance to tell people, don't pay your rent for 3 months because the government's going to do it. It upends the entire system. And then that young woman and her daughter that you were talking about who had an emergency, there will be no money for them. There will be no money for them.
Except that, Mayor, ERAP is the most cost-effective way to keep people in their system, in their housing. Once they leave that housing, the cost to support them skyrockets astronomically.
Robert,
and there is no evidence that I have seen, only narratives, that people are abusing ERAP. If that's happening, somebody needs to step forward with some information and recommendations.
So you said this last year, right? And so you took our proposal from $9 million and took it to $41 million.
$8 million.
You could have decided last year to make it whatever you wanted, but you didn't.
I did.
You made it $41 million, and that's not enough.
That's right.
So you haven't figured,
because of inequity in our city.
You haven't figured it out either.
No, you haven't figured it out.
No, I
because
haven't.
inequity is so large that a large population of our city can't pay their rent, can't afford to live here.
So what do you
and
think
their
is the
options
answer?
are to go into our homeless shelters, which cost taxpayers more, or be displaced from our city, which I don't want to see.
None of us want to see that. But we cannot create the perverse incentives for people who were paying their rent before the pandemic in state DC are no longer paying their rent. And we have to work on that.
I think you need to have more conversations with people struggling in this city, Mayor. Because I think that the perspective you hold on ERAP is out of line with the lived experiences of people applying for ERAP.
Well, Councilmember, I look forward to how you plus it up. And when you plus it up, how long you think it will last next year? Because what you would have done is condition people to say, don't pay your rent. The government will do it for you, and it will never be enough.
That is an absolute illogical jump from the reality that I'm talking about.
No, this argument is illogical.
For the Housing Authority, over the last few years, you and the council have dedicated $50 million a year to DCHA's repair and maintenance fund. In last year's budget, I worked with my council colleagues and the chair to include dedicated funding for DCHA starting in 2028. Given the billions of dollars in deferred maintenance, the facility needs for DCHA, and the quarter of housing units in DCHA's portfolio that people cannot live in, they are uninhabitable right now. You cut the dedicated funding in your proposal. Do you plan to support the new DCHA leadership with sustained investments in public housing in this budget?